Howdy, folks, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Good to be here.
We're mighty glad you've tuned in today, joining us right here from Overton County. We've got something a bit different today, but really powerful stuff to explore.
Yeah, we've been looking through some really fascinating material. Notes, transcripts, study guides.
All pulled from a conversation that happened, well, years back, way across the ocean in Prague.
That's right. Between two fellas you might have heard of, Ram Dass and Terence McKenna.
And they were talking about some big, fundamental things, consciousness, transformation, the state of the world.
Exactly. And these sources, they give us a real window into this recorded talk. McKenna was actually interviewing Ram Dass.
Where was this, you said?
At an international transpersonal conference. And Prague, Czechoslovakia back then. Wow, I felt significant.
How so?
Well, McKenna saw it as a, quote, fitting venue. It was right on the edge of all those massive changes happening in Europe. And he felt it was a metaphor, for the kind of deep transformation needed not just for the planet, but inside people, too.
Makes sense.
He even mentioned Prague's history, its reputation for intellectual innovation chance-taking. It was a backdrop loaded with meaning.
So our mission today, like always here on the Deep Dive, is to sort of sift through this material.
Pull out the important bits.
Yeah, make sense of it together and see what light it shines on things that matter to us right here, right now.
And it's not about, agreeing with every single word.
Not at all. It's about understanding the ideas, right, as they're presented in these sources you've shared. So let's unpack this thing.
Okay, so let's picture it. Prague, late 80s, early 90s, a city just steeped in history, on the verge of big shifts.
Yeah.
The source material describes the scene, maybe at a table, having a bite to eat. And you've got Ram Dass, Richard Alpert originally. The material calls him an enduring figure from the 60s cultural upheaval.
Right, the Harvard professor who went elsewhere.
Exactly. From Harvard University to the plains of the Punjab. And his transformation led him, as the source says, to be a spokesman for humanity's ignored and downtrodden.
And then you've got Terence McKenna doing the interviewing.
Right. And he's described as being deeply interested in science, spirituality, and the mounting global crisis. Those intersections.
Were there other folks around?
Yeah, a few others are mentioned. Ralph Abraham apparently made a comment about the mushroom.
Oh, okay.
And there's this lovely little detail about their waiter. He introduced himself as Mr. Jealous.
Mr. Jealous, really?
Yeah, and he recognized Ram Dass, was apparently thrilled he was in Prague, just beaming about his city.
That's great. Little human moments, mixed in with all the big ideas.
Absolutely. It really grounds it, doesn't it? Even if they're talking about these huge universal themes.
So, okay, they're there in Prague. What did they start talking about? I imagine psychedelics came up pretty early.
Oh, definitely. It was a shared part of their history, right? Substances like psilocybin and LSD.
Yeah.
They talked about the role those played in their own transformations.
What was McKenna's take?
Well, his core point, as it comes across in the sources, was the power of it happening to him, personally. His assumption was something like, look, I'm a very ordinary person, therefore if it happened to me, it could happen to anyone. He saw his own experience as, proof of potential.
But Ram Dass, he pushed back a little, or add nuance.
Yeah, exactly. He acknowledged the power, for sure, but he suggested the outcome isn't guaranteed to be the same for everyone. He compared it to sexuality, how experiences can differ so much person to person.
That's interesting.
And he floated this really intriguing idea. Maybe psychedelics may have already done what they were to do.
Meaning
maybe their main impact, the seeds they planted, is already so much more powerful than anybody yet recognizes. The ripples are still spreading out, even if we don't always see the source.
Huh. Okay. Did they talk about how they thought these things worked?
They did. The key idea presented was that they dissolve boundaries.
Dissolve boundaries.
And McKenna directly linked that to the ego. The ego, he said, is always in the business of creating, maintaining, and defending boundaries.
Right. Walls.
Exactly. So this boundary dissolution, in his view, directly addresses our inability to emotionally connect with the consequences of what we're doing, especially on a big scale.
Wow.
He says, pretty bluntly, if for a single moment we could reveal what we're doing, we would stop. The idea is these substances offer that momentary glimpse beyond the usual ego defenses.
That's a heavy thought. That our own inner walls stop us from seeing the damage.
It is. And it leads McKenna to ask Ram Dass a really crucial question.
Which is?
Can the global transformation that's needed, can it happen without psychedelics?
Yeah.
And maybe more importantly, can it happen fast enough without them?
What did Ram Dass say to that?
Well, his response, according to the material, was thoughtful. He said he could conceive of it happening without them. But he didn't really offer an opinion on whether it would. He didn't seem certain.
He kept it open.
Right. And he shared a story from his friend John Seed, the rainforest activist.
Yeah.
Seed apparently felt the inertia around saving the rainforests was just so huge it would take a miracle.
I think a lot of folks feel that way about big problems.
But then Seed apparently turned it around, reminding them of humanity's, quote, lineage of miracles.
Lineage of miracles? Like what?
Like, say, evolving from the ocean onto land. Huge, seemingly impossible leaps, suggesting maybe transformation can happen in ways we don't conventionally expect.
Possibility beyond the usual tools. Okay, so from catalysts like psychedelics, where did the conversation go?
They pivoted to something even more fundamental, really. The nature of reality itself.
Okay, getting deeper now.
Yeah. McKenna puts forward this idea. He says something like, we're finding a world made out of mind rather than stuff.
Mind, not stuff. So consciousness is primary.
That seems to be the implication. That maybe mind isn't just a product of matter, but maybe it's the other way around. Or that they're inseparable.
And he brought up this idea of archaic recursion. What's that about?
Right, archaic recursion. It sounds kind of academic, but the idea is pretty interesting. He suggests the way forward, the escape maybe, isn't about some sci-fi future.
No, then what?
He says, no, it's into an archaic recursion of some sort. We once knew everything we need to know.
Ah, so going back.
So what we're trying to find out is lost knowledge, not new knowledge. It's about rediscovering something ancient, something we've forgotten.
Lost knowledge, not new knowledge. Okay. Did he give examples?
He did. He pointed to different movements in the 20th century that he saw as part of this drive back towards the archaic.
Like what?
Like Impressionism, how it broke down realism to get at the feeling tone, or Freud and Jung exploring the unconscious.
How did he frame them?
Freud, he said, through repressed primitive sexual imaginings, and Jung through folklore fairy tales and mythology, both digging into older layers of the mind.
Okay, art and psychology. What else?
He mentioned the Dadaists and Surrealists, how they broke up linear expectations, and even Jackson Pollock throwing out the image itself.
Kind of deconstructing things.
Yeah, breaking down structures. And then he connects it to the 60s, the psychedelic movement, seeing it as leading towards shamanism, tribalism, nomadism.
Back to older ways of being.
Exactly. In his view, these were all sort of echoes or recursions of that ancient knowledge trying to surface again.
Fascinating. Okay, so from these big picture ideas about reality and history, the focus shifts again, doesn't it? To something very personal with Ram Dass.
Yes, absolutely. To his reflections on suffering and grace. And this part of the source material is, well, it's incredibly moving.
Tell us about it.
He talks about experiencing what he calls the ecstasy of total horror and total beauty at the same moment.
Wow, horror and beauty together.
Yeah. He describes this feeling, he calls it multifrenia, like holding multiple contradictory realities all at once.
Multifrenia.
He mentions sitting with someone dying of AIDS and feeling the horrible shit, the awful reality of the illness.
Right.
But at the exact same time, sensing the perfection of it all and the beauty of the moment.
That's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. He says, it all is spun together.
Hmm.
He lives, he says, with this funny, continuous paradox that suffering stinks and suffering's grace.
Suffering stinks and suffering's grace, not one or the other.
Exactly. The difficulty and the beauty, the pain and the learning, they're all interwoven for him.
Does he talk about how he holds that?
He shares a teaching from his friend Emmanuel, who he described as not having a physical body.
Okay.
Emmanuel apparently told him that death is absolutely safe and compared it to taking out the tight shoe.
Taking off the tight shoe.
Yeah.
Like a relief.
A relief, a release. That's the sense of it.
Did Emmanuel say anything about why we're here, the purpose of it all?
Yeah, Ram Dass asked him, what am I doing on this plane? And the answer was incredibly simple. You're in school. The curriculum is life, any life, Emmanuel said. Meaning, the point is, the exploration of the cleaning of mind within the world of projected form.
Cleaning of mind.
Ram Dass interprets this as, like, life being this process of purification, of working through our stuff, so we can return to a state he calls, metaphorically, the Garden of Eden.
Back to wholeness, maybe?
Something like that.
Yeah.
A state of original awareness. It's a powerful frame.
You're in school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that That perspective could really change how you approach challenges, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
So from Life as a Curriculum, they looked back at a specific class they both took, you might say the 1960s.
Right. They reflect on that whole cultural movement. And Ramdas points out what he saw as a key mistake early on.
What was that?
He called it idealism and a kind of naivete.
How so?
The thinking was basically, because you had seen it, you'd had this personal realization, you could just say it's all love and then everybody would love. Like just saying it would make it so for everyone else.
Yeah. The idea that personal insight automatically translates.
Exactly. And Ram Dass pinpoints the reason for that mistake.
Which was?
He says they weren't working on ourselves deeply enough to be without the clinging of mind that made us try to use it.
Clinging of mind, meaning ego, attachment.
Yeah, or their own lurking righteousness, as he puts it. They weren't acting from pure presence, maybe, but from a place that still wanted to fix or change or use the insight on others.
That makes sense. You got to clean your own house first, maybe.
Something like that. And they contrasted this with the idea of a Velvet Revolution, which was happening around that time in Eastern Europe.
Right, like with the Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia.
Precisely. Ram Dass expresses real admiration for Havel. He saw him as a compassionate leader with wisdom, not just knowledge.
What did he admire specifically?
Havel's emphasis on allowing naturalness to come back, the personal stuff, the hearts, letting authenticity lead. Ram Dass felt that was the crucial piece they never found in the 60s.
The heart connection, the inner work.
Right. And Ram Dass tells a story in the source material that really illustrates this, the monk and the army general.
Oh yeah. Tell us that one.
Well, the gist is, the general threatens the monk with his sword, saying he could run him through, and the monk is just utterly calm.
Not scared.
Apparently not. He says something like the sword could pass right through his belly without waking up. Just complete inner stillness in the face of the threat.
Wow.
And Ram Dass uses this story to point toward a different kind of power, a place from which revolutions could actually heal rather than just starting the cycle all over again.
Unlike reacting with more aggression.
Exactly. He contrasts it with how the 60s generation often reacted to violence, maybe getting caught up in making statements or protesting against something.
Instead of acting from that deep inner place.
That's the idea. He felt they were often busy making statements instead of just being it.
So it comes back to acting from emptiness.
Yeah, he uses that term, referencing the Buddhist idea that out of emptiness rises compassion. True action comes from that quiet place.
How do you know what action to take then?
He says his own practice is to keep shutting up, to hear which one it is, to listen inwardly for the appropriateness of the act in that specific moment.
Just listening, not forcing it.
Right. Then McKenna brings up the 70s, how there was that quick counter-revolution that seemed to undo a lot of the 60s changes.
Yeah, things seem to snap back.
Ram Dass kind of sees that as a natural reverberation.
Yeah.
And he suggests the opportunity, the real potential for a different kind of shift happened then, back in that 60s moment of insight.
A missed opportunity, maybe?
Oh.
Or one whose effects are still unfolding, like you said about psychedelics.
Maybe both. It's complex.
So, building on these lessons about inner work and authentic action, they talk about actually living this stuff, especially as a public figure.
Yeah, that's a big theme. Ram Dass reflects on dealing with the public projecting a special identity onto him.
Being put on a pedestal.
Right. He calls it a sadness, but also part of his practice, something he has to work with to transpose, as he puts it.
How does he work with it?
He finds a way to engage with it. Even says he tries to consume it joyfully, participate in it passionately. Not just reject it, but meet it consciously.
That sounds tricky.
He even mentions using public confession, saying things like, I'm not a good guy, don't follow me, I'm a bad guy.
Why would he do that?
He calls it the subtlest form of wasp story. Maybe like, it was history, or maybe wasp story. Anyway, it seems like a way to disarm those projections by just openly admitting his own flaws, performing his own humanity.
Kind of heading off the pedestal thing at the pass?
Perhaps.
No.
And they bring up that famous Gandhi line, my life is my message.
A high bar?
Yeah. Ram Dass admits that's a struggle. He feels more like, my message, please don't look at my life because I'm a fallible human being.
Honest, at least.
Very. But McKenna, according to the source, kind of pushes back a bit, suggesting that maybe this struggle, this sense of waffling, could potentially weaken the message itself.
Interesting tension there between the ideal and the reality of being human.
Definitely. But Ram Dass doesn't just stay in the inner world. He talks about engaging directly with suffering.
Like his work in Guatemala.
Exactly. He mentions working with Mayan widows in Guatemala And he feels this deep responsibility as an American citizen
Why?
because he sees his own government's policies as directly harming them, killing them, as he puts it. He feels he has to play both games.
The inner game and the outer game.
Right. The inner work and the external action. He connects this to principles from the Bhagavad Gita,
Which ones?
specifically not identified with the actor and not being identified with the fruits of the action.
Acting without attachment to the role or the results.
That's the core of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it ties back to that paradox we talked about, living with the fact that suffering stinks, it's awful, but also seeing it simultaneously as grace.
Holding both.
Holding both. Acting with compassion, but without getting consumed by the outcome or identifying solely with the do-gooder role. He calls this the coincidentia oppositorum.
Coincidence of opposites.
Right. Or, more playfully, the optimum judo move. Finding the most skillful way to engage without adding more struggle.
It's a sophisticated approach.
It is.
Yeah.
And even then, he shares a moment of humility. Feeling half-baked compared to someone he admired, Leo Zeff, who he felt was finished, fully realized.
Always more school, maybe.
Seems like it. Which leads them towards the end of the conversation, looking at leadership and the future.
What were their thoughts there? This was what, early 90s?
Yeah. And they discussed the feeling back then that maybe there wasn't a single unifying figure for the younger generation.
Like a new kind of leader.
Yeah. And they pondered that old question. Does the person make the times, or do the times call forth the person?
The chicken or the egg of leadership.
Pretty much. And Ram Dass offered his view on what authentic leadership looks like.
What's that?
He felt it doesn't come from someone claiming the role, not like a projected Christ figure or something.
Okay.
But it emerges more organically from the needs of the moment, like a light forming out of the needs of the people.
So leadership arises rather than being imposed.
That's the sense. And a true leader, he felt, speaks from a true enough place in my heart that authenticity is key.
Why?
Because that genuine quality actually reduces paranoia and fear in others and allows them to flower, to step into their own potential.
Huh. Leadership that empowers others.
Exactly. Then McKenna observes how Ram Dass himself navigated the whole gauntlet of American media.
Yeah, he stayed visible for a long time.
Right. Maybe differently than some contemporaries like Allen Ginsberg, who became more of a poet laureate figure, or Timothy Leary, who ended up more in the club scene, as McKenna puts it.
How did Ram Dass see his own position?
He reflects on feeling like he was always the second, or maybe embracing this idea from Ralph Abraham that to be third is the real good position.
Third, like out of the main spotlight.
Yeah, maybe less pressure, less projection. He notes kind of humorously that for years people introduced him mainly as Tim Leary's partner and only recently stopped.
Wow. Shadow of the 60s.
Yeah. And he talks about his current experience then, speaking to audiences in Middle America.
Folks who maybe hadn't done psychedelics or read Eastern books.
Right. And he says he's telling them the same stuff I was saying in the 60s, but now it's landing, it's resonating.
I'm interesting. So what did he make of that?
He sort of wonders aloud, asking, am I an anachronism from the 60s, or am I just about to happen a prop?
Like, am I outdated, or is my time just arriving?
Exactly. But then he concludes, I don't care. The message is the message. The work is the work, regardless of how he's perceived.
Letting go of that outcome again.
Seems like it. And McKenna closes their documented talk with a thought for Ram Dass, but maybe for all of us.
What's that?
He calls him, and everyone, a prophet to be. And he quotes Bilbo Baggins.
From Lord of the Rings?
Yep. The greatest adventure still lies ahead.
A hopeful note.
Mostly. Though Ram Dass does share a pretty stark prediction he heard from an old Indian saint.
Oh, what was that?
Foreseeing a time so isolated that just walking 5 miles and seeing the light from a fire of another person would bring intense happiness.
Oof. A warning about disconnection.
Yeah. But they also touch on how trauma, difficulty, can sometimes soften the ground for positive change.
How so?
Ram Dass gives an example from Marin County, where a severe water shortage actually broke down social barriers. Neighbors who never spoke started talking, cooperating, sharing resources because of the shared crisis.
Crisis creating community.
Sometimes. And Ram Dass leaves one last thought hanging in the air, that Nietzsche quote.
Remind me.
There was only one Christian, and they crucified him. Makes you think about how authentic messages are sometimes received.
Phew. Okay. That was a real journey through some deep water, wasn't it?
It sure was. A lot to chew on there.
From Prague as a metaphor to psychedelics dissolving boundaries, archaic recursion, suffering, and grace.
Wow. And the lessons from the 60s, that idea of inner work being crucial, Havel.
Yeah, finding that quiet strength, acting from emptiness, it really makes you pause and consider where we've been and maybe where we're headed, individually, collectively.
It absolutely does. And it brings all these big ideas right back home, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, thinking about transformation, finding peace when things are tough.
Yeah.
That's not just for famous figures talking philosophy somewhere else. It's for us right here in Overton County.
True.
How do we take these ideas, inner work, compassion, being present, and actually weave them into our lives day to day, whether we're, down on the square at Livingston or out on Dale Hollow or driving towards Cookeville?
Yeah, how do we make it real? What does it mean for us to let our lives be the message people see and feel, not just our words?
That's the question, isn't it?
Here's something to maybe carry with you, folks. Ram Dass talked about living with that paradox, seeing the ecstasy of total horror and total beauty all at once.
Suffering and perfection together.
Right. As we walk our own paths, right here in Tennessee, how can we maybe start to see that same kind of grace, that interconnectedness, even in the middle of the struggles we face, out in the world or just inside our own hearts?
Does seeing that deeper pattern, as you might call it, change how we respond when things get hard?
It's a powerful thought.
And, this whole deep dive, it offers a pretty remarkable challenge, doesn't it? Maybe even a miraculous one, thinking back to John Seed.
What's the challenge?
It reminds us that real change, the kind that actually heals, instead of just spinning the same old cycles, it starts inside with us.
Okay.
So the call to action today, folks, it's this. Take these ideas, inner stillness, compassion, presence, and start living them right where you are.
Actions.
Let your actions, whatever they are, come from that quiet heart, that clearer mind. Let that be a kind of light in your corner of Overton County. Be the transformation the world needs, starting right here, lived out in your life.
Let your life be the message.
Let your life be the message that folks around here can actually see and feel.
We really hope this deep dive sparked some thoughts for you, maybe raise some questions.
Yeah, we'd genuinely love to hear what resonated or what you're still thinking about.
And y'all can help this deep dive reach more folks who are looking to understand things a little better. If this conversation meant something to you, please take a second to like it, maybe leave a comment with your reflections.
And subscribe so you don't miss the next one. It helps get the word out.
It surely does.
And now, just as we wrap up, maybe we can offer a quiet, heartfelt prayer for the well-being of all sentient beings, all life, everywhere.
Please do.
May peace find its way into every heart. May understanding grow. May grace touch all beings, easing suffering where it's found. May we remember how connected we all are and find compassion for ourselves and for each other. Amen.
Amen. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this deep dive. A big shout out to everyone listening, wherever you might be tuning in from.
Especially our neighbors right here in Overton County.
That's right. We truly appreciate you joining us today. Until next time, keep digging deep.